So you mentioned communities. So let's talk about Minnesota, which is what our main theme is for this season. So we want to show Minnesota as a hub for Carnatic music, just like how Dallas, San Francisco, the East Coast have all of these like, big hubs for Carnatic music. So does Minnesota. So, and you mentioned a bunch of communities here. I mean, not just like, not like just your non-Indian friends, but like tell us about like how like the organizations here, the community here, how you felt, your personal experience with the different organizations here.
Yes, in the context of Carnatic music.
Yeah,
Yes,
and then we can shift to Western.
absolutely. Yes. I used to think that because we were a smaller community just in terms of population, particularly say 10 years ago or so, 15 years ago, um, I actually thought that we worked to stoke the fire stronger. We were all the more insistent on making sure that we didn't lose our culture and that we not only kept tended that fire and made it grow strong, that cultural fire, but also planted it in new places that you wouldn't expect. So I think about things like the library programs that Nadrasa does. That isn't just about strengthening the bonds of the Indian community. That is about sharing this great art form with other people and inviting them into that space. And many times that's been paired with a holiday like Diwali. And so sharing what that holiday means to us. So I think because we started out as a smaller place in terms of just, sheer numbers, I think because of that, we're probably more close knit and all the more eager to make sure that we not only strengthen our bonds as a community, but again, share it and bring it out to people. So, organizations, there are so many that have been influential in that. Certainly, IMSOM is a huge one, the Indian Music Society of Minnesota, because when they started, which I think is more than 40 years ago, their intent was not only just to have so that for people who are away from home to have the music from home, but then to share it with audiences. And you'll see this in the audiences they bring in, which I think is really important for the sustainability of any art form. And for that art form, even if it's a tradition like ours, to grow and evolve and change. Is to have different groups of people coming in to experience it and be exposed to it. But absolutely, I think about IMSOM. I think Nadrasa as an institution has been quite influential in this. It's going on 20 years, and certainly is a school, but is also a family, and is even partners with many other organizations to make this happen. Certainly, we all well know Layasadam Institute of Indian Arts as being another very very significant one that also brings in artists and hosts them and has performances with them. I think our different temples are very very significant again in that cultural tending to the cultural world. And this is the thing about something like Hinduism is as a religion. It's really a way of life as we know. And so there's a lot of very particular religious practices, but you can't really separate them from the cultural activity. So it's great that the mandir serves as a home for that, as well as SV Temple serves as a home for that. And we also have a Sai Mandir. There's lots of different govils around town that are fostering this. And if you think about SV Temple, they've hosted the Carnatic Star competitions. I think that was a huge one for putting our state on the map. And people who don't live in Minnesota have come out from out of town to participate in this competition too, because it's a gathering, right? It was almost like a festival in itself. I think they use the term festival for it because it's bringing together all these artists. It's bringing this intensity for students. It's certainly something for them to work towards. It's always good that students should be practicing and not just working towards a goal, but it's nice to have some kind of different way of looking to inspire you to work. So the Carnatic Star competition organized by Karnataka Global it had huge impact on me. And I think particularly because it had so many different categories. Like it didn't just have, many competitions are out there and those have been really important and significant and fostering students' work. But I think having categories like theory and having categories like multimedia presentations, and I think now they have raga identification and maybe even a fancy dress competition. This is something people then come together to look at different aspects of the music and also, take some pride in it. It's really cool to be able to tell my school friends, yeah, I'm going to this event and I will the whole time be dressed in my traditional clothing and partaking in this event and doing all these activities and maybe speaking in my native language the whole time. And so having all of these these events to even go to is really significant and was certainly influential for me growing up to be able to take pride in that. And I think for all of you as well, and to find each other and to become friends through music, that's really, 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 really important too. In the case of Carnatic Star, I think, the fact that they had competitions like theory and stuff, that is looking at aspects that are not just where only certain people can shine. I think even if you're still working on getting your performance skills to a certain level, you can bring your knowledge and your passion for knowledge to the theory and to the other categories. So, it just really, I think every May when that was happening, that piqued the inquisitiveness of the students. And like I said, we started having other people come in from out of town to also participate in this because they thought it was a great opportunity. And then a hugely significant part of all of that, of course, has been the artists who've come to our town and graced our town with their presence, and then the artists who are here, who are building that strong world and building it here, and also doing service by going elsewhere and performing, and then putting Minnesota on the map too. But for so many artists to want to return here, I mean, I think a big example of that is Tanjavur Shrike Murgbhupati Sir, because I recall an IMSAM concert about 10 years ago. This was, like I said, 10 years ago. They said something like, he's practically one of our own because he's constantly come on tour to Minnesota. And I think then that is another reason then that he has students here now, is because he was coming here often because people were so passionate and interested in the music. So I think there are so many institutions, probably more that I don't even know about since I've not been living in Minnesota for the past 6 years. And it's just so great to see more and more coming and making this happen.
Yeah, it's really nice to hear that, Aka. And also, now this is a big question, and I think all of us have experienced this. So, talking like trying to introduce Carnatic music to like your friends that might know like what like class like to your music friends, I guess, like non-Indian music friends. So trying to explain what Carnatic music is. How did you deal with that? Because I know I had a tough time trying to like help them interpret what we do and how like some things are different, some things are similar. So tell us how like knowing like Western classical music, how are you able to like, bring Carnatic music? How are you able to like explain to them what we do?
That's a great question, and thank you for asking. And I would say that my response to it has changed over the years. If I think about how I shared it with my friends, my musical friends in high school, compared to now having, done college, masters, all of that. And now sometimes, I present to Western classical musicians on this topic. So I think there are a couple ways to approach it, and it can depend on the setting. So if it is indeed like a formal presentation, like the kinds that I often do, that is a certain calls for a certain kind of presenting. And I don't think you don't have to shy away from the sort of grandeur of the tradition when you're sharing that, because we come from lineage, right, with this music, and we're an oral tradition, so lineage matters. Parampara matters in that sense. So I think that can, definitely we can share it in those terms. It can be a little different if you're explaining it to a friend casually. If they just are just sort of curious and they want to know, and it's like, well, how much do you want to know? Because we are this is an ocean right here, and we only have a drop. So how much do we want to share? I think one thing, if I could advise my younger self on this topic, so if I could advise 16-year-old Shruthi and how she was sharing it with her musical colleagues who were not Carnatic musicians, I would say don't feel the pressure to translate everything, because these are imperfect translations.
Yeah.
We are a musical system that has particular priorities. We have certain values and certain rules. Western classical music, even as completely evolving tradition that's changed, dramatically from what might have been played 300, 400 years ago, it also has traditions and also has rules. It's also, by the way, important to remember that what we know about this music, has really been codified in the last 100 years with the advent of sabas and such. And so what we think of this music too could have changed a lot. It could have changed just as much as Western classical, just as a side note. But in terms of like talking about things, so for example, raga, right? How to explain raga? So you can talk about it as a scale. You can also talk about it as a human being or a personality. There's a lot of space in between scale, like a group of cluster of notes, and personality and human. And we are also, as students, still learning these topics. I certainly feel that I am. You might as well. So I think translations can be helpful as like a working definition, right? Like if you're sharing a new food with your, if you take them to India Palace and they want to know what you're eating, it can be helpful to. I'm speaking from an actual experience. I had my sweet 16 at India Palace, so that was literally my birthday party was at India Palace, and I still take friends there often. It can be helpful to translate, gulab jamun as like a ball of like sugar or however. I'm not really sure how you're going to do that one. Or paneer as cheese, but that's a very imperfect definition. It's not going to taste anything like Swiss cheese. And I think what's really, really important, I've found, particularly if Western musicians are going to step into the space slightly of Carnatic music, like when I compose pieces that have some Carnatic influence, and to make sure that everyone steps in respectfully into the space, all of us, including myself, are respecting the tradition. It's important to try to get them to not use their own terms for it, but to attempt to use the new terms. It's all a new language, right? To be able to wield these terms is not easy. But instead of to think of it as like paneer is some kind of Swiss cheese, so I'm very clearly not, think of it as paneer. Paneer is paneer. And it might resemble certain things, and we can, as facilitators, we can talk about the resemblances, but it's also very important to make it known that this is it on its own terms. And I speak of this strongly because, some issues that we are discussing in the music world and in contemporary music has to do with how people treat other musical systems and treating them with respect. And they come from, it's very tempting for all of us. I don't know if you've ever heard some rhythm from some instruments in some tradition and wanting to say, oh, this sounds like taka taka taka, just trying to put it in our terms. It's our language, so of course you want to put it in your own terms. But to try to understand it as something that you don't necessarily fully know the full picture of, and to be okay with not knowing everything yet, I think that's a really important thing. So for those of us who are so used to, my name is Shruthi, but you can call me Shruthi, making all of these concessions, and and those are ones that I'm okay with. I don't mind my name being pronounced as Shruthi. That's kind of another identity of myself. I see it. We don't have to compromise, though, I think, when we're explaining it. And people who care about us and musical friends who care about us will be willing to understand that any of those definitions we're using are they're working translations. Because I ran into situations once where we were doing some pretty hardcore Carnatic gamakams in a piece I'd written called Ganam, which is in Kalyani, most of it. And so, we were doing some pretty intensive work into this raga, in my opinion, given that this was all new to them. And I ran into a situation where someone was asking if it's a trill. If you're familiar with Western classical music, a trill is sort of oscillating between two notes. And I realized then that I had made a mistake because I had allowed ornamentation to be the translation of gamakam. But ornamentation is not the translation that we should use, because ornamentation suggests something that could be added or removed. And ornaments can be taken off and the essence is still there. That's not the case with most of our gamakams. If you remove the gamakam, you've lost the essence of the raga. And so that's when I realized that, first of all, motion wasn't a trill. That's a different category of motion. That wasn't the motion. And secondly, thinking of it as an ornament meant that they thought it was something that was kind of superficial, that could be removed, as it might be in Western music. You do trills in certain ways. You might use them in a sort of an idiomatic way, but they can't be removed from my ragas. Then it's not the raga anymore. So that's when I realized that I had made a mistake, not the person who was trying to translate it and try to understand it in that way. We had to make it clear that paneer is not Swiss cheese, but paneer is
paneer. Great. So let's dive in more into your Western musical journey. You went to college for Western music. You started going to New Jersey, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And then you started doing your master's in England after that, in, I think it was 2018, if I'm not mistaken, or 2016.
Yes. So I went to school in New Jersey. I was at Princeton from 2014 to 2018. And I went indeed and pursued a major in music. And at the time when I was at Princeton, I think things are changing a bit. A music major mostly meant Western classical music, but not exclusively. So I was very fortunate to be encouraged to pursue kind of whatever I wanted to with that path. And so I started a group for Indian classical music called Princeton Swara. There had been a few before the attempts at Princeton to start that, but there wasn't one active when I went, and so we started Swara for both Hindustani and Carnatic, which has been really great, and they're still going strong. And some of the members, I saw them recently in December 2019 because one was performing. The two of them were performing kacheris in the December season.
Oh,
That was really really great to go
interesting.
and fun to go see these young singer, young musicians, making their mark and getting going. So that was great to see. So I it was a, that's affiliated with the music department. So the music department supports that, and because I was composing, I was kind of free to work in different realms. Now, what gets tricky if you want to pursue Carnatic music in a university in the U.S. is having advisors and teachers who can help with that. In my case, my advisor had actually written. He's an Irish composer, brilliant Irish composer, but he'd actually written a piece inspired by Konoko when
Oh,
he was
wow.
at some point. Yeah, he was very interested in Konoko
Wow.
and such.
Okay.
So
Nice.
the composition I wrote with him has a mora actually in it. I
Mm-hmm.
worked with Murugubati Sir to Bubati uncle helped me work on that and work on
Wow.
creating a mora, and there are a couple korves leading into that. I made a very interesting choice in that piece where I made the
Nice.
mora the climax, not
Wow.
korve. So I'll
Okay.
send you that later on to see what
Yeah,
I'm curious as
please.
a Mridangam student
I'm
what you
very
feel about
intrigued.
that.
Yeah.
With the mora being the climax. What was really cool is my Swara friends. They came to the concert, including a wonderful young mridangam player that was in that group, and they were really impressed that the choir was doing like I wouldn't exactly say it was all konoko. Some of it was sung. Like I put some of it to music, but yeah, being able to say ta and not tha or ta and
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
ta. Things like that. We
Yeah.
worked really hard to get that. And they did a really great job. So I was encouraged. So I got to write a piece, that was like I said,
Wow.
had these elements in it. But definitely, I've found as I've gone into sort of higher education, even my postgraduate studies, it's very important where what kind of advisors and access you can have, which is why I think so many Carnatic musicians have often studied with gurus privately. So many of them have gone to music college and pursued that route, but many of them have also had gurus. Like in the case of Amma, her gurus were both professors. Maybe all three were professors. Yeah, all three were professors at universities, but she was studying with them privately and studying something else as her main subject, which is what a lot of people do that in America too. They continue, young Indian Americans continue to study with their gurus and then go for university. But for me, music is so essential to my being that I wanted that to be the main thing I was studying at Princeton. And I fell more and more in love with Western classical music and found a path for me to bring my, Carnatic identity into it. So that's where I was lucky. In
Yeah.
England, my first degree that I did was in ethnomusicology. I don't know if this is a field that you both know, but traditionally, ethnomusicology has studied the non-Western musics of the world. Increasingly, it's much more about a critical approach to any kind of musical practice. So there are ethnomusicologists who will study the musical culture of Medina, Minnesota. They'll just come to a study of that particular region.
Mm-hmm.
But I went to study for Carnatic music. So this was really interesting because I went and studied in a Western academic institution that was studying Carnatic music or Indian classical music, really. So my supervisors, so actually all of my professors were white, and I think overwhelmingly white British while I was there, which isn't the case with every department. But it was the case at this one. So this is a very special thing. There are very few places you can go to study something like this. Like I can tell you, when we went into the school library, all of there are resources on Dictionary and stuff in this. Can you imagine at a university, lots of resources on Dictionary? And I was, it's like choosing which one do I want to look at today. I wrote papers on Dictionary and Drupad. My dissertation for my first master's degree was on Parn Issei, which is like, I don't know if you're familiar with Parn, but it's this ancient kind of Tamil music. So I was looking at Silapatikaram and such and translations of that for mentions of Parn, and looking at this completely, looking at very, very, very esoteric topic. And the resources were there at this university. I was at a school called SOAS. So that was very, very special to get that opportunity. My second master's was in composition. And I found that when I wanted to do a research topic, continuing my research on Parn or related topics, there weren't professors at that school who knew that topic. they had maybe some passing familiarity with Indian classical music, but not to the extent that I would have needed. So that's something, I don't know. I mean, both of you are starting to reach the stage of thinking about future and where you want to be doing, but you have to be, yeah, you have to be aware of sort of what the institution has in terms of instructors, or keep
Mm-hmm.
your instruction private and keep studying privately with your teachers.
Yeah. Wow.
Very insightful. Very insightful.
It's really like, honestly, I honestly have zero words, because like it's so intriguing to like know how that there's Carnatic music in a university in London. So it's crazy.
You know, outside that school, there's a statue of Tiruvalluvar, like when you go to the school. So
Oh
I took
wow.
both of my parents there. I'll send you both a
Wow.
picture. It's
That's
really
very
special.
interesting. Wow.
The school is an interesting one. It's one of the only places in the world where you can study these kinds of things, which is why I went there, and I was very fortunate to have the
Wow.
scholarship that let me go. But
Yeah, and the
it
Marshall
started as a,
Scholarship. Right?
yes,
Yeah.
the Marshall Scholarship. That's right, from the UK government. But the unfortunate or kind of complicated past of the school is it started as a place to train colonial officers. So these were the people who then came, you know, and ruled our ancestors. And it was a complicated relationship sometimes
Yeah.
between the different, you know, it's not like, you know, colonialism was complicated. You know, some people, you know, a few people in our country at least thrived under it. Probably most did not. But it was a complicated relationship. But that was why the school was founded. So that's why they teach, you know, they teach a lot of our languages there. You know, they educate people. That's how it began. Now the school has moved very much away from those kind of troubling roots and is very, very passionate about, you know, you won't find many resources on like Western classical music in the library there. Like I said, you'll only, you know, there's a whole floor dedicated to South Asian culture. The whole floor of the library
Wow.
is South Asian culture, and you know,
Amazing, amazing.
several rows on books of Hinduism and such. You know, it's really, really special, and I think it was very moving when I took my parents there for them to see that. But it has this complicated past, like a lot of things that are old. You learn a complicated history with them, but yes, a very, very special school. So if you're ever in London, do take a look at that
Yeah.
statue.
Definitely. So I think we're at that point where we're slowly winding down. So we have just like a couple of questions to ask. So obviously composing music, you would have a bunch of different, like, you know, people to listen to, a bunch of people to reference. So which Western composer do you find very intriguing that you love to listen to all the time and get your ideas from? And same thing with Carnatic music as well. So I guess you're dealing with two different artists slash composers.
That's a great question and really hard to just choose one. That you put me in this position. Huh?
Because
um,
you know, just to like I guess like the most I guess the most you felt that you connected with them when you were like, you know, composing or getting ideas from them.
yeah. Still very hard, but I guess I could put a category of composers. So, um, I think it's become increasingly important for me to listen to music by women of color in the Western classical realm. And I think a lot of me connects to a lot of what they create, and I don't know why that is. And I mean, aesthetically too, you know, maybe we have sort of similar styles, but maybe they're often telling stories that relate to me. So I think this has become a very, very important category. At the same time, I'm currently playing through some J.S. Bach music, and finding a lot of intricacy in the mathematical way that he thinks with his music. It uses a lot of counterpoint and ideas of that where you would use arithmetic to count things, which is not so different from Kalpanaswarams or something, you know, counting in that way. So I think that approach also appeals to me. So there's this mathematical approach, and to that for which I would turn to someone like Bach or his contemporaries. There were many women also writing in that style at the time. History has not remembered their names. And of course, in contemporary, in terms of people who are today writing, I think a lot of women of color who compose. There's something about their music that I almost instantly connect with, and sometimes I don't even know it's a woman of color until I've learned more. But there's something in the music of their personality, of their life, of their experiences. Um, in terms of artists and work, it's really hard to say, but I think I get really inspired by artists who are both respectful but also innovating. So I think of somebody like Shruthi or Subramaniam, for example, our guru's guru, because he was so innovative, so imaginative, and you can see, in every, like, for example, this Pallavi that I got to do in my Arangecham, is full of swaraksharams and just very full of this creative way of thinking, and you could do things that would, um, you could innovate with it and feel like it's his composition, but I could feel like I could create in it. He was inviting space, creating space, welcoming people to adapt and create his works. At the same time, my husband recently telling me, stories where he would talk about it doesn't really matter if you can do like all of these really, really fancy calculations and such if you're not touching the person's heart, also to the listener's
Right.
heart.
Yeah.
So that to me, then I find so much to be inspired by, because here was someone who just when he first came and sang for people, they were just stunned at this brain and this intelligence and his approach. But he very much believed in respecting the tradition, even as he innovated, and then also touching the listener and making them feel things and connecting with them, which I think is so important. And you can do all of these fancy things, but if you can create that connection, that's what this is about, right? It's about communicating with other humans and feeling like we are joined in some way. So I find that incredibly inspiring. I don't know, that was a very, very vague answer because there are too many people to choose, but I hope that gives you some idea of what I look for in music.
Yeah. The perspective was the perspective was very clear, though.
Okay, sure. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, Shruthi, before we give you the final question, we'd like to thank you for coming on the show. Thank you so much for taking your time out of composing for numerous organizations and people and everything. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show and and put up with our mediocre questions.
No, it was such an honor, and thank you for asking such thought-provoking questions too. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I care to spill the Shruthi here, so it's nice of you guys.
Yeah. So I think the final question that we'd like to ask is, there are a lot of young people coming in, wanting to go into music in college. They want to go into music, but they get discouraged by the elder generation, their parents, their aunties and uncles, like, oh, wouldn't you rather be an engineer because music will be hard to come into, right? But you are one of the prime examples that you can still make a great living in music. It's such a fun thing to do, and you'll be very happy with pursuing music. Can you give the young people some advice on just how to go into college like that, what the first step is?
Thank you for that question, and thank you for seeing it that way. I see myself as very early starting on, so you'll have to watch for a few years to see if it's actually worked out, if it's been a flop. I completely sympathize with my fellow young Indian Americans who are at that stage. It can be kind of tricky, especially if you are good at a variety of subjects too, and there are other things that you are able to do. So then when you receive, sensible advice to consider how this career works, it's not, it's not that our older family members don't have a point. They do have a point. This isn't an easy industry by any means. I think the lesson I've taken away from the last 6 months and what we've been living in, even as I've seen that, if we're going to be very candid, it's been probably harder for musicians and for people who don't have steady employment to survive right now. Certainly for musicians, I mean, we know this. We've seen that organizations like Global Carnatic Musicians Association and stuff are doing great work because people are so much in need, because they're not able to do what they're trained to do, which is perform for people. But I also see it, and maybe I'm like overly optimistic, but I also see it as this is a time in one's life where nothing is certain. And not to be very grim, but a lot of people are fighting for their lives right now in every sense of the word, health wise or holding on to their homes, whatever it is. There's so little that's known about what our next several months are going to be like, despite having lived through this for already 6, 7 months, and we're all pretty weary of it and tired. We don't even know what's coming up next. And for me, I took that as, I feel glad that, if life is so ephemeral and potentially, short and unexpected, I want to be doing something with it that I really love. And so little is certain, and so many friends I have who have worked in very, very sort of, chosen steady paths, and ones that are bound to give them just one direction of success and never have they never thought they'd have the highs and lows of life. Well, maybe they don't have their job right now, or maybe, things have drastically changed. So I see that as an imperative then to do the thing that makes you most excited to face the world, and the thing that satisfies you the most. And it's not that pursuing your dream is always going to, be like an easy, great ride. I'm very early into this, and yet I can see that. And sometimes it hurts more when it's not going well, because you care that much more about it. Yeah. But why are we here on this earth? Are we here? I mean, there's many questions, so we can answer this. You both might have more spiritual answers to this, and, more thought through answers to this. But are we here to acquire a big house? Are we here to no, I think we are here not just to live our passion. I think we are here to make connection with people. And if the best way we make connection is through your music, through your arts, then how could you let that go? Now, finding a way to make it work is different for everyone. I would say that if you're thinking of pursuing music, which I don't know if it's the case for either of you, but that would be wonderful for the musical world if either of you are, it is probably important to take as many actions as you can. I'm just giving very practical advice. It's probably important to take as much action as you can in what's in your control to make sure that that future is going to be one that will sustain you. Because you can't just be sustained on swaras. You also need bread and other things to sustain you. You need food on the table to sustain you. In my case, I was, like I said, really fortunate to get scholarships and things like that made it possible for me to make connections with more musicians, widen my network. And I think that that's really significant, is to put yourself, if you're going to do it, to put yourself in the best position that you can to access all this. So practicing like crazy, immersing yourself in it, and figuring out what is your deal. Why do you want to be an artist? Now, this is something, as we train as Carnatic musical students, and we train really intensively, and we fall in love with it. But maybe we don't always spend a lot of time thinking about who we are as artists. And we're students, so we're still learning, and so maybe you're still finding that voice. But I think having that desire for why you want to be an artist is really, really important, and finding that what is it that you want to bring? What is it that maybe you're not seeing in the world that you want to bring? And sometimes it even means thinking a little bit in an entrepreneurial way and thinking creatively. I think the two of you are doing that right now with this. This started out as a passion, creating this podcast, but it's also creating, another space for your voice to exist. So that is also, entrepreneurial in a sense. So there are many, many ways of going about it, but I think that having that passion and that desire to make it work can carry one really far. And as we live in these times where so little is certain, why would you want to spend, what little time we have on this earth doing something that doesn't make you happy?
Good question. Yeah.
You heard it here, guys. Keep pursuing music because it makes you happy. Keep working towards music if you want to become a musician. And just keep practicing for the fun of it, because music, it makes us all happy. Thank you so much, Shruthi, for coming on the show and taking your time to become on the show. Thank you, everybody at home, for listening. Please make sure to go subscribe to the channel and like the video. Make sure to go check out the links in the description. We'll link Shruthi's website, shruthirajasekar.com. You can also go check her out. And thank you, everybody, for listening.
This is the Bros signing off.